If you're into witch horror stories, the kind with eerie sightings, rituals, and supernatural encounters in isolated places, this video is for you. Like the story you're about to hear, where a simple camping trip in the mountains turns into a silent nightmare, when a shadowy figure stirs a cauldron under the moonlight, as if waiting for someone. But before we dive into the story, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any terrifying stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. That was the last time I ever went camping without doing some serious research on the area first. We thought we knew enough just because it was in the US, but there are places here that carry a kind of silence, different. And the silence in the Blue Ridge Mountains, that was the heaviest I've ever felt. It was Jake's idea. He'd seen some pictures of the place, a lake surrounded by towering, dense trees, with a flat spot perfect for setting up camp. He said it was peaceful, secluded, great for fishing, and a way to forget about life for a few days. I didn't hesitate. We both needed a break from the world. No notifications, no city noise. We left our phones at home and only brought a satellite phone, more for protocol than actual fear. The trip there was long. We took the highway, then a dirt road, then a trail that seemed to lead to nowhere. But when we finally arrived and saw the lake, it all made sense. Still water, the mountains reflected on the surface, and that thick smell of damp earth. We set up camp on the east side of the lake where the trees were thinner. Nothing around, no visible trails. It was like we'd stumbled upon a place the world had forgotten. On the first day, we just fished, set up the tent, built a fire, and cooked right there, with the sounds of nature as our soundtrack. Jake was hyped about the huge trout we caught, and we laughed all night like we were back in college. The sky was clear, packed with stars, and aside from the crickets and the wind, there was nothing else. No road noise, no planes overhead, no sign of human life except us. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel off. We were already lying in the tent half asleep when I heard a strange sound. Low, rhythmic, like someone was tapping lightly on something hollow. At first I thought it was the lake water hitting a piece of wood, but the sound had a pattern. Like a drum, you know? A dry, repetitive beat, distant but constant. Jake heard it too. He asked if it was an animal, but it didn't sound like anything we'd heard before. We stayed quiet for a few minutes, trying to ignore it, but the sound kept going. The same beat, always the same rhythm, like it was coming from deep in the forest. Around 2 a.m., unable to sleep, I decided to step outside and check it out. I grabbed the machete we always bring into the woods and walked toward the sound. The air was freezing, and the silence was eerie. The crickets had stopped, and that sent a chill down my spine. When the forest goes quiet like that, something's wrong. I moved slowly, trying not to make a sound, with just my flashlight in one hand and the machete in the other. That's when I saw the light, faint, orange, flickering, like a small campfire. I got closer, hiding behind some thick trees, and in a clearing that I swear wasn't there before, I saw a woman. Old, really old. She was wearing a tattered dark dress, stirring a cauldron over the fire. The scene looked like something out of an old horror movie, but it was real, right in front of me. She had her back to me, but it was like she knew I was there. Her arms were thin, wrinkled, and her fingers, way too long, stirred the cauldron's contents with a wooden spoon. I couldn't see what was inside, but the smell was strong, like rotting meat mixed with burnt herbs. Her head moved in a weird rhythm, like she was chanting something but silently. I froze. Something inside me screamed to get out of there, but my body wouldn't move. I just stood there, hidden, watching. Suddenly, she stopped stirring. She stayed still for a few seconds, then turned her face toward me. She didn't have a chin. Her face was deformed, like her skin had melted and stuck to the bone. Her eyes, they were two dark, sunken pits that seemed to swallow the flashlight's beam. I couldn't move. I tried to run, to scream, anything, but nothing worked. It was like the air had turned thick, heavy. A wave of negative energy took over everything, like I'd been pulled into some ancient nightmare. Those eyes held me in place, and then everything went black, literally. The fire vanished, the woman disappeared, the clearing was gone. I blinked, and I was back in the middle of the woods, alone, in the dark. No trace of fire, no smell, no sign that anyone had been there. I stumbled back to camp, my legs shaking. Jake was sitting outside the tent holding the satellite phone. He said he was about to call for help, but the device had no signal. I spent the rest of the night wide awake. Didn't sleep for a second. I sat there with the machete in my hand, staring into the forest, waiting for that woman, or whatever she was, to come back. But she didn't. No drumming, no light, nothing. Just that heavy silence, like something was watching me from a distance, waiting for me to blink so it could strike. The next morning, the sun felt weak, like it didn't have the strength to warm anything. We packed up in silence and got out of there as fast as we could. As I took down the tent, I found a long black feather stuck in the zipper. I didn't put that there. And what scared me the most, as we turned our backs and took our first steps away from camp, I could have sworn I heard that drumbeat again. But this time, it sounded closer. We left that place without looking back. We walked in silence to where we'd parked the car, each step heavier than the last. Jake didn't ask any questions, and I didn't say a word, but I could tell he'd felt something that night. The way he kept glancing around, nervous, it wasn't just exhaustion. It was fear, the real kind. When we got back to town, I tried to move on, but I couldn't shake it. Something was wrong, like I'd brought a piece of that forest back with me. I started researching the area, looking up local legends, anything that could make sense of it. That's when I found some old stories, really old ones, told by the elders who lived near the Blue Ridge Mountains. They talked about a woman who appears on moonless nights, cooking something in a cauldron deep in the woods. A witch. They say she picks someone to watch, and whoever sees her face never comes back the same. I told the story to an old man who sold fishing bait at a gas station near the trailhead. He listened without interrupting, not once. When I finished, all he said was, "Y'all are only alive 'cause you stayed awake. If you'd slept, you wouldn't be here now." At the time, I laughed it off as superstitious old-timer talk, but deep down I knew he was right. That witch's stare. It was like she was testing me, like she wanted to take me, but she was waiting for a sign. A slip-up, a moment of weakness. After that day, I never went camping again without being armed, and never near mountains, especially not near a lake. I carry this constant feeling of being followed. You know that feeling when you walk into a dark room and you're sure someone's watching you? That's me, every single day. I don't care if you believe me or not. I'm not here to convince anyone. I just thought I should tell the story, because there are things in this world that are old, way older than any city, any country, any religion. Things that don't like being disturbed, and sometimes they let you escape, just to remind you they're still there. So if you ever go camping in a place that seems too isolated, and you hear drumming coming from the woods, don't follow the sound. Don't turn on your flashlight, and for the love of God, don't fall asleep. Creepy, right? What did you think of the story? On a scale from 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. Some presences seem to appear out of nowhere, but others have been there all along, waiting to be discovered. Just like in the next story, where an innocent camping trip among friends uncovers signs of something much older and far more disturbing. I still remember the smell of that forest. Damp, thick, clinging to my clothes like it would never let go. It was my first spring living in Serbia, and I was trying to fit in with the locals. I'd moved there a few months earlier after taking a remote job. I wanted peace, a quieter place far from the chaos of the city. And I'd found a cheap house in a forgotten village, surrounded by hills and dense woods on every side. The idea for the camping trip came up last minute. It was the Spring Festival, a traditional celebration around here, part pagan, part folklore, and the locals often gathered in the forest. They'd light bonfires, roast meat, drink rakija until sunrise. A group of young villagers invited me along, and I said yes. I was curious. I wanted to understand their traditions better. We reached the clearing just before dusk. We set up tents, gathered firewood, and soon the bonfire was crackling. It was a beautiful spot, Tall trees all around with an open space in the center. There was even a fallen log that worked as a bench. Someone brought an old radio and started playing folk music, and before long the stories began. Tales of local legends, people who'd vanished in the woods, voices calling names in the dead of night. You know how it is. Every isolated place has its ghost stories. The mood was light at first. We laughed, roasted sausages on sticks, toasted with warm rakija. But as night fell and a few bottles later, the energy shifted. A strange silence settled over the trees. No birds, no rustling wind, just the crackle of the fire and our voices dropping, like someone had turned down the volume on the world outside. That's when someone noticed the firewood was running low. I volunteered to grab more with Milan, a guy around my age, one of the locals who'd been the friendliest to me since I arrived. We grabbed an old lantern and headed into the woods, trying to remember where we'd found dry branches earlier. We didn't go far, maybe 15 minutes, when we stumbled upon a dead tree standing among the green ones. It was stark, almost white. Not a single leaf left, like it had died long ago but still stood untouched. That's when Milan pointed upward. High in the tree, wedged between the branches, was a lamb. Dead. But not just any dead animal. It was clean, intact, almost fresh. No flies, no stench of rot. Its fur was smooth, white, as if it had just been placed there. The way it was positioned was odd, too. Belly up, legs dangling to the sides, like it had been carefully arranged. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking. Something about the scene was deeply wrong. The air in that part of the forest felt heavy, like it had thickened. You know that feeling when it seems like nature itself is holding its breath? Milan muttered something in Serbian I didn't catch, but his tone was clear. Fear. He grabbed my arm and said we should go back. I asked if he knew what it was, but he just shook his head. On the way back, he whispered that this had happened before. Years ago, another spring just like this, a village boy had found a goat hanging from a dead tree in a different part of the forest. He said the animal had been clean too, no blood, no wounds. And days later, a strange symbol was found drawn in the dirt of a nearby farm, a pentagram. When we returned to the clearing, we told the group what we'd seen. The reaction was a mix of awkward silence and forced laughter. Luca, one of the older guys, said not to worry. Sometimes hunters did things like that, rituals for good luck in the hunting season. But the way he said it didn't ring true. There was something off, like he was trying to reassure us without believing it himself. As the night went on, the mood never recovered. Someone added more wood to the fire, but the heat didn't seem to reach us. The drinks lost their appeal. Slowly, we all fell quiet again. I felt like something was watching us from the woods. Not paranoia, just presence. A sense that the forest was alive, aware, like it knew we'd seen something we shouldn't have. The next morning, back home, I dug for any information about that area. I asked neighbors, searched local forums, even found an old newspaper article about a farm that, after a supposed ritual, had soil so barren nothing would grow for a whole year. Not even weeds. The owner called it a plague or a curse. That something had been awakened there. The strangest part? The farm was just a few miles from where we'd camped. Since then, I can't stop thinking about that tree, the lamb, everything that felt so unnatural. I've tried to make sense of what I saw that night, but the more I search for answers, the more questions arise. A few days later, I decided to go back to the forest alone. I know it sounds crazy, but something was pulling me back. It wasn't curiosity. It was like something had been left unfinished, hanging in the air. Like when you feel you've forgotten something but can't remember what. Only deeper. A kind of unease that wouldn't fade, no matter how much time passed or how quiet I kept. I waited until late afternoon, grabbed a lantern, a bottle of water, and followed the same trail we'd taken that night. The plan was simple. Find the dead tree, take a closer look, maybe understand something. But as soon as I neared the clearing, everything felt wrong again. The same heavy silence, suffocating like the forest was frozen in time. No sounds, no wind. The lantern started flickering, even though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. The tree was still there, untouched, but the lamb was gone. Nothing. No fur, no marks on the branches, no blood, like it had never existed. I stood there for a long time, trying to process it. That's when I heard a noise, soft, like twigs snapping. It came from deeper in the forest, where the trees were thickest. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer. But it didn't sound natural. It was rhythmic, like footsteps. I decided to follow. I don't know if it was impulse or some part of me demanding answers. I moved slowly, dodging branches, and the deeper I went, the colder the air became. Even with my jacket, I felt a chill down my spine. The lantern shook in my hand, flickering. Then I saw something between the trees, a small stone structure almost completely covered in moss and roots. An old altar broken in the middle of nowhere. On top of it was a circle made of small, dry bones, animal bones. And in the center, dark, damp earth with a strong, bitter smell, like someone had been there recently. I stood there, hypnotized. I stepped closer without thinking. That's when I saw it. Drawn in the center of the altar, among the bones, was a symbol. A pentagram, just like Milan had mentioned. Only this one was made of a strange mix of clay and something reddish, something I'd rather not identify. Suddenly, the whole forest seemed to breathe. A wave of heat rose from the ground. My heart raced. It was like something had woken up beneath my feet. I tried to step back, but I heard a voice, whispering my name, clear from somewhere in the woods, like someone was right behind me. But when I turned, there was no one. Just trees, darkness, and that sound, now louder, of branches breaking. I ran. I didn't look back, I just ran. The trees seemed to shift. Everything looked the same, twisted. I didn't know which way I was going. The lantern fell from my hand, dead. The smell of wet earth grew stronger, and with it a suffocating feeling, like I was being pushed out. When I finally stumbled into the clearing where we'd camped, I collapsed onto the ground, sweating, gasping, my clothes torn from branches. I made it home in the early hours of the morning. For days I couldn't sleep right. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that symbol, heard that whisper again. The presence, the heavy energy, the feeling that something had marked me. I started having strange dreams. Dreams of the dead tree, of dead animals, of hooded women singing in a language I didn't understand. Always the same scene, a dark forest, a stone altar, and the distant sound of drums. I talked to an old woman in the village, Mrs. Radmila, who warned me not to mess with those things. She said that forest had been known for generations as a place of rituals, that even before Christianity, ancient cults used the area to awaken the forces of the earth. She called it blood magic. That some lineages still kept those traditions, and that seeing what I saw meant I'd been noticed. Since then, I've avoided that part of the woods, but I can't ignore what happened. I've tried to live normally, work, take care of the house. But the problem is, some nights, when the wind blows from the north, I hear that whisper again, calling my name. And the worst part? Deep down, part of me wants to answer, because there's something there. Something that isn't finished. So bizarre, right? Some things we stumble upon out in the world are so strange. It almost feels impossible they weren't caused by an unseen force. But what happens when that force is inside us? The next story is about someone who grew up feeling that presence, and one day decided to test it. When I was a kid, my mom used to say some people are born with their heart open to the unseen. Back then, I didn't really get what that meant, but all it took was walking down a trail in the middle of the woods or passing by some secluded waterfall, and I'd feel that chill creeping up my spine, like something was watching me, recognizing me. She'd just smile and say, "They know you can feel them." Over time, that feeling only got stronger. It wasn't just out in nature anymore. Sometimes I'd step into places that seemed totally normal to everyone else, but my throat would tighten up like a knot. The air felt heavy, like some unseen force was pressing down on my chest. By the time I hit my teens, this sensitivity turned into a kind of curse. Any charged environment, any unstable person, it all hit me like a wave. I was always exhausted, battling insomnia, and drowning in weird dreams that felt more like warnings than sleep. That's when I started digging deeper into witchcraft. Not the Instagram-worthy stuff with colored candles and overpriced crystals from some new age shop. I wanted the real deal, the spiritual side of it. Ancient rituals, practices tied to the earth, the moon's cycles, the plants. I could feel there was some hidden truth in it, something ancestral calling me back. I started small, just reading. I'd track down old grimoires and PDFs, watch obscure videos from practitioners who stayed off the radar, and scribble everything into a black notebook I kept locked in a wooden box. The first thing I tried was a simple focus spell. Nothing fancy, just some herbs, a drawn sigil, and a candle. I was failing my classes at the time, and I figured, why not? And it worked. My mind felt clearer, sharper. That little win hooked me. After that, I started testing more, small protection rituals, herbal baths, charms for lucid dreaming. But somewhere along the way, the line between light and dark started to blur, and I didn't even notice when I crossed it. One day, I stumbled on a spell in some old forum, buried in a thread of cryptic comments. It was a chant to draw inner power, but it demanded heavier stuff: hair, blood, and a symbolic offering to burn at midnight. I did it, alone, in my room. Lights off, curtains drawn, salt circle traced on the floor. I recited the words. The next few days, things got weird. First, the sounds, footsteps, faint, careful, like someone was tiptoeing through the house, trying not to be heard. But I lived alone. Then came the cold. Didn't matter if it was summer or if the window was shut. My room turned freezing. A dry, biting cold. And there was this presence. You know that feeling when you just know someone's standing behind you, but when you turn around, there's nothing. That, every night. I chalked it up to paranoia, exhaustion, maybe some psychological side effect of the rituals. So I tried to stop, packed away my books, the notebook, the altar tools. But it didn't help. The room got heavier, the air thick, hard to breathe, and the more I ignored it, the closer it got. Then came the night I woke up to a noise, like someone was dragging their nails across my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate, the kind of sound that slithers into your ears and coils around your spine. I flipped on the light, nothing. But the salt I'd sprinkled on the floor, just a thin line around my bed, had been disturbed, like something had stepped over it, on purpose. That's when I started looking for real protection, something old school. I went back to this little church near my place, not for the religion but for the relief I felt inside. Like a safe house. I talked to an old groundskeeper who always sat in the back. He seemed wiser than the priests. I told him some of what was happening and he gave me a small talisman, wood and silver. Told me to keep it on me, always, and sleep with it under my pillow. The first night I slept with it, I had a dream. Or, not a dream. More like I woke up inside it. My room was dark, just like always, but I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. Only this time it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was terrifying. I heard whispers, lots of them, in a language I didn't recognize. Hissing, rhythmic, almost like a chant. And in the corner of the room, between the closet and the wall, there was a figure. Tall, dark, just standing there, watching. I couldn't scream, only my eyes could move, and even without a face, I knew it was looking straight into me. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, my throat raw. The talisman had fallen to the floor, far from the bed, and from that night on, the whispers started coming when I was awake too. Soft, quick, sometimes in the shower, sometimes while I was doing dishes, sometimes in the middle of the street, leaking through my headphones between songs. Always in that same strange language. The feeling of being watched became constant. And the cold. God, the cold was unbearable. My room turned into this dark pit where time seemed to stand still. I'd bundle up to my neck, but it didn't help. It was like a negative energy had seeped into the walls, like something had moved in. But the worst was still coming. I started dreading sleep. I'd lie awake for hours, lights on, jumping at every tiny sound like it was a warning of something about to step into the room. Sometimes I'd feel the bed dip beside me. Other times the talisman would vibrate under my pillow, like it was reacting to something nearby. One of those nights I finally dozed off from sheer exhaustion and went straight into another paralysis. But this time, it was different. No whispers, no footsteps, just silence. A thick, suffocating silence like the sound had been ripped out of the room. And then she appeared again, closer this time, sitting on the edge of my bed. Her outline was clearer, a thin, feminine figure, long hair covering where her face should have been. But there was no face, just empty, shadowed space like that part of her had been torn away. The cold she brought was like ice in my veins. I felt pain, actual physical pain, like my soul was being pulled out, thread by thread. But instead of fear, this strange sadness washed over me, a grief that wasn't mine, ancient, desperate, like she wanted me to feel what she had felt, and I did. Then my fingers twitched, then my hand. With all the strength I had, I grabbed the talisman from under my pillow and clenched it tight. She pulled back, didn't vanish, just retreated, like she was honoring the gesture. And in that moment, something unexpected hit me. Empathy. I can't explain it, but something in me understood she didn't want to hurt me. She wanted to be heard, acknowledged, maybe even forgiven. I whispered, "I hear you," into the dark, and for the first time in weeks, the room felt calm. The next morning, the heaviness in the air had lifted. The cold still lingered, but it wasn't oppressive. The whispers stopped, the footsteps too. I felt lighter, like something had been settled or set free. But even now, with everything seemingly quiet, I still wake up sometimes in the dead of night with that old feeling of being watched. The talisman stays with me, and every time I think about opening that black notebook again, something deep inside warns me not to. And I still wonder, did I call her? Or was she always there, waiting for someone who could listen? Terrifying. Messing with hidden forces can open doors that never close again. And sometimes the price isn't fear, it's sacrifice. Like in the next story, where a simple cup of tea changes 2 lives forever. But before we go on, if you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying our stories. So go ahead and hit the like button. That way YouTube knows you love this kind of content, and you won't miss any more horror stories. They say every street has its odd house. Mine has 2, mine and Miss Johnson's. I grew up in that old brick house, its walls darkened by time, its windows arched like the spine of an ancient book. The garden out front always smelled of dried herbs, thyme, sage, things my great-grandmother planted decades ago. The house passed from her to my grandmother, then to my mother, and now, it's mine. The tea shop sits just beyond the iron gate, which groans every time it opens, as if complaining about the years. That's where I spend my days, steeping blends, mixing herbs, and listening to the whispers of the neighborhood, especially Miss Johnson's. She's made my life her personal crusade. Every morning is the same. I unlock the door at 7, wipe down the wooden tables, light a stick of incense, and let the kettle sing while I arrange the jars on the counter. Chamomile, fennel, lavender, hibiscus, and a few blends I invented myself, recipes pulled from the yellowed pages of books left behind by the women who came before me. Some folks swear my teas can cure anything, but I've never claimed that. I just let the results speak for themselves. Then there's Miss Johnson, a bitter woman, her white hair pulled back so tight it looks like she's trying to stretch the wrinkles out of her face. Every time she passes the tea shop, she spits on the ground and hisses, "Witch," as if I've ever so much as glanced her way with ill intent. I've never responded. I just watch. Because some things are better left to silence than to words. But then came her grandson, Jake. He showed up on a rainy Wednesday, draped in a soaked trench coat, his expression as surprised as mine. I knew who he was. I'd seen his picture in a crooked frame on Miss Johnson's wall, but he seemed different, kind. He stepped into the tea shop like he didn't belong to any of that old grudge. My grandma sent me. Said you've got a tea for her joint pain, something with black tea and some kind of root. Black tea with ginger root? Yeah, that's it. Can you make it? I prepared the tea without much conversation. He stood there, staring at the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, the shelves lined with hand-labeled jars. When I handed him the cup, he cradled it with both hands and inhaled deeply, like he was trying to decode the scent. "Do you really believe in this stuff?" he asked. "Believe in what?" "Tea that heals, herbs that calm, leaves that protect." "Believing doesn't change the effect, or does it?" He smiled, a short, genuine one, and then he left. The next day he came back, and the day after that. He started asking for different teas each time. One for insomnia, another for anxiety, another for his stomach. I knew it was just an excuse. He came to talk, and talking to him was easy. Jake didn't have his grandmother's suspicious glare. He didn't watch me like I might hex him at any moment. He was curious but respectful. Still, I kept my distance, not out of fear, but out of habit. I learned early that getting too close always comes with a price. Over time, he started sharing stories. His tough childhood, his mother who died young, how Miss Johnson raised him. She'd always been the way she was now, he said. Hard, cold, full of rules. But despite it all, he cared for her. A twisted kind of love, but real. One day he looked me in the eye and said, "If I asked you out, would you say yes?" "No." "Why?" "Because you're Miss Johnson's grandson." "Is that a joke?" "No, just the truth." He laughed, more surprised than offended. Then he leaned a little closer over the counter and said, "So tell me what I'd have to do to change your mind." "Anything. Just name it." "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Anything." Maybe it was the challenge. Maybe it was impulse. But I said, "I want Da Hong Pao, the real kind, from Wuyi Mountain." "That's tea?" "Tea. Rare, expensive, and nearly impossible to get." He raised his eyebrows but didn't back down. "All right, give me some time." And just like that, he was gone. No drama, no goodbye. He vanished for days. At first I thought it was all talk, that he'd forget or give up. But then I got a letter. No return address, just a Chinese postmark and 3 handwritten lines. "Found the place. Might take a while. Don't tell my grandma. Take care of the garden for me." I tucked the letter into an empty tea tin and went on with my life. Miss Johnson stopped shouting for a few days, maybe puzzled by her grandson's absence. Then she went back to her usual routine, though with less fire. And I kept opening the tea shop every day, just like always, pretending I didn't care, pretending he wasn't missed. Then, almost 2 months later, a man appeared at my door. Chinese, dressed simply with downcast eyes and a quiet voice. He didn't say much, just handed me a carved wooden box. Inside was a small red cloth bundle filled with tea leaves and a heavy leather pouch. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside were the bones of Jake's hand and a dried flower, a Da Hong Pao blossom. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just stared at it all and understood. I buried everything, the box, the bones, the flower, the tea, in the garden, deep, where no one would dig. And for a while I was silent. The neighborhood kept whispering. Miss Johnson kept up her act of hatred, but I didn't react. I didn't do anything but prepare my teas, and from that day on, one of them always contained a leaf of Da Hong Pao. The first to taste it was Miss Johnson herself. She shuffled into the tea shop one afternoon, leaning heavier on her cane than usual, and for the first time she didn't call me a witch. She just sat on the porch chair, paler than ever, and murmured, "I'm tired. Give me the tea for the pain." I made it, a blend of chamomile, ginger root, a hint of anise, and 1 leaf of the rare tea that cost Jake his life. She drank it slowly, her hands trembling, then sat there staring at nothing. The next day she came back, and the day after that. Within days, her gait improved. Her skin lost its grayish tint. Her eyes grew clearer. She started talking to me, and I pretended it wasn't strange. She told stories of the past, of when the street was still dirt, of how she'd always hated my great-grandmother because she knew too much. She spoke slowly, like she was remembering a life that no longer belonged to her. My grandson. He was too good for this world, she said one afternoon, staring into an empty cup. He was, I replied softly. That's when she started calling me girl. And over time, I became the only person she talked to. The other neighbors whispered, asked if I'd worked some spell. I just smiled, never answered. But it wasn't just her body that improved. It was time itself. She stopped aging. After 5 years, no new wrinkles appeared. The pain vanished. Her memory sharpened, and every time she drank the tea, I felt a strange energy in the house. Like the air grew thicker, heavier. I started having dreams. Dreams of towering mountains, thick mist, and a voice. Jake's voice, but not quite. It was as if his essence had merged with something ancient, something deep. He said my name, but he wasn't begging for help. He was asking for permanence, as if he wanted me to remember, as if all of this was part of something bigger. And that's when I understood. The exchange. Jake got the tea, and the price was his life. But not just that. Miss Johnson's life was extended, maybe even made endless, and part of Jake's energy was still here, trapped. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I went to the cellar and prepared the final batch with the last leaf of Da Hong Pao. I mixed it with a herb I only use in extreme cases, a bitter root known for severing any bond, any tie. I brewed the tea and left it ready for the next morning. She drank it smiling, said it was the best she'd ever tasted. 15 minutes later, she began bleeding from her eyes. She slumped from the chair with a sigh that sounded like relief. As I knelt beside her, she whispered, "He's here, with me." I buried the entire box in the garden. Bones, flour, tea, everything. I never used that blend again. Never made anything but ordinary teas. The shop still stands. But those who enter now say they feel a strange chill, as if something is watching their every move. Maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe it's Jake keeping his end of the bargain, and me, I keep mine. Scary, huh? What did you think of the story? On a scale from 0 to 10, what rating would you give it? Share your opinion in the comments. When we pulled the car over onto the dirt shoulder and I felt the wind hit my face, I could already tell this place was different. The trees were towering, dense, and it felt like they muffled every sound, as if the forest itself was always listening to what we said. The trailhead started there, tucked away in a nearly hidden corner of the road. No sign, no marker, just an old rusted wooden gate and a chain someone had left unlatched. This was our first family hiking trip in a long time. Me, my wife, my brother, and his daughter Isabella. The plan was to spend 5 days trekking through the Appalachian Mountains, staying in a cabin we'd booked months in advance. The idea was simple. Each day we'd pick a different trail, spend the day hiking, return to the cabin before dark, eat, rest, and repeat. The first 3 days were smooth. Stunning views, perfect weather, no cell service, which, honestly, was a relief. We laughed, took pictures, joked about the giant roaches crawling on the tree trunks, and Isabella kept saying she was going to write it all down in a notebook, like some kind of adventure journal. But on the 4th day, things started to change. My brother suggested a more remote trail he'd spotted on a topographic map he found in the cabin. It wasn't marked on any of the hiking apps, but it looked interesting. Cutting through a narrow valley, passing by a creek, then climbing through a thick stretch of forest. I wasn't 100% comfortable with the idea, but everyone else was game, and deep down, I wanted to break from the usual trails too. We packed our bags, filled our water bottles, grabbed snacks, a compass, a whistle, and set off. From the start, I felt something off. Not fear exactly, more like unease. A restless, hard-to-explain discomfort. The forest seemed darker, even with the sun high overhead. The trees looked sickly, their branches twisted, leaves too dry for summer. And the sound, it was strange. No birds, no crickets, just the muffled rustle of wind through the treetops, and even that sounded stifled. At times, it felt like our own footsteps were being swallowed by the woods. The trail was narrow, covered in damp leaves, and barely visible. At one point, we had to cross a small creek by hopping over slippery rocks. Isabella almost fell, and we laughed, but underneath, I don't know. There was a tension in the air no one was naming. Then, about 40 minutes into the hike, the first weird thing happened. I heard a sound. It was like a chant. No, more like a hum, a low, repetitive melody, almost hypnotic. It sounded like a language I'd never heard before, full of guttural tones and hisses. At first I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was something human, coming from somewhere ahead, deep in the woods. I stopped dead in my tracks. I stood there, listening. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I felt a sharp pang in my stomach, like I'd been startled from the inside. I asked the others, "Do you hear that?" They looked at me like I'd just said something crazy. "Hear what?" my wife asked. "The chanting, someone singing up ahead, you don't hear it?" My brother frowned, glancing around. "There's nothing, man. Must be the wind." But the sound kept going. To me, it was clear as day. It seemed to come from all directions at once. And the harder I tried to make out the words, if they even were words, the more my head started to ache, like my brain was trying to translate something forbidden. I took a deep breath, shook my head, and kept walking. Maybe it was all in my head, or some weird echo from the creek. We hiked for another 30 minutes until we reached a flatter section with a small clearing. It was the perfect spot to stop and eat. We sat on fallen logs, unpacked our bags, and pulled out sandwiches, dried fruit, and protein bars. While the others ate and chatted, I was still lost in my head, trying to figure out why that bad feeling wouldn't go away. It was like something was watching us the whole time, like the forest had eyes. And then, suddenly, everything went silent, but not the usual kind of silence. It was like the world had been turned off. The wind stopped. The leaves stopped moving. Even the sound of our own movements seemed to vanish for a moment. Isabella noticed first. She froze, a piece of bread in her hand, staring straight ahead. "Who's that woman?" she whispered. We followed her gaze, and there she was. On the other side of the clearing, standing completely still, was a figure. An elderly woman, her skin deathly pale, almost colorless, like old parchment. She wore a long, filthy robe, caked with mud and leaves, clinging to her thin frame like a rag. Her hair was white, wild, hanging in thin strands down to the middle of her back. Her face, it was hard to describe. It wasn't exactly ugly, but something was off. Her eyes were too deep set, like she'd hollowed them out herself. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at us. No one knew what to say. No one knew if she was real or if we were all having the same hallucination. My heart raced, and a heavy energy filled the air. My stomach turned to stone. It was like her presence was sucking the air out of the place, a spiritual weight like she was part of the forest, or something worse. And then, without warning, she just vanished. Not turned away, not ran, not disappeared into the trees. Gone, in the blink of an eye. And in the same instant, the forest seemed to breathe again. The wind picked up, the birds started singing. The weight in my stomach vanished, just like that. I felt light, almost dizzy. I looked at the others. They seemed just as lost but relieved, like a tension we hadn't even known we were carrying had been ripped away all at once. No one said a word. We just stood up, packed our things, and started back. But in that moment, something had changed. We didn't know it yet, but we weren't the same people who had stepped onto that trail that morning. The hike back was silent. No one talked, no one joked, not even Isabella. All we heard was the sound of our footsteps on the damp ground and the crunch of leaves. The forest seemed darker than before, like the sun had set early. The trail we'd already hiked now felt different. Everything was tighter, more twisted. The vegetation seemed to have closed in behind us. I couldn't stop thinking about that woman. There was no way she was just some ordinary person. No one hikes those trails alone, especially dressed like that. And the way she disappeared, it wasn't something you could explain. It was like the air had swallowed her whole. At one point, I heard Isabella whisper to her aunt, "I think she's following us." My heart stopped. I looked back, and of course, no one was there. But the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. You know that feeling like something is right behind you, but you can't look, because if you do, you'll come face to face with it? That's what it was like. We picked up the pace. I tried to stay calm, but the trail seemed to stretch on forever. What should have taken an hour, tops, was taking twice as long. My feet ached, my throat was dry, and the air felt thicker, heavier, like the forest was pressing in on us. And that's when Isabella tripped. She fell to her knees and started crying, saying someone had grabbed her ankle. We helped her up, and my wife looked at me with wide eyes. There were marks on the girl's ankle, like fingers, thin and dirty. "Don't look back," I said. I don't know why I said it, but it felt right. We needed to get out of there, fast. By the time we reached the wooden gate, the sky was already darkening, but it wasn't the usual twilight. The sky was grayish, almost green, like a storm was brewing from within the forest. And just as we passed through the gate, the wind stopped again, like it had in the clearing. Only this time, something whispered. It was a low, dry sound right in my ear. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt warm breath. It was real, and it came with a smell, damp earth and burnt flesh. I turned around on instinct, and there, between the trees, right at the edge of the forest, she was there. The old woman, standing, just like before, only now she was smiling. A small smile, but with dark, jagged teeth. And even from a distance, I could see her eyes glowing. Not with light, but with anger. An ancient anger, like she'd marked us, like it wasn't over. I grabbed everyone and yelled for them to get in the car. The drive back to the cabin had never felt so long. When we got inside, we locked every door. None of us slept well that night. And the next morning, without even discussing it, we packed our things, left the cabin key hanging on the door, and drove away. We never went back to that trail, or those mountains. Sometimes, when I'm alone at home, reading or scrolling on my phone, I hear that hum again, soft, like distant chanting coming from the back of my mind. And every time it happens, I remember her eyes. And I wonder if, that day we left the forest, or if she left with us. And after that last story, you'll never look at a trail deep in the forest the same way again, right? If you've made it this far, you've already seen this channel isn't just about cheap scares. It's about atmosphere, mystery, and storytelling. So go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. There are plenty of strange things still waiting to be told. And leave a comment down below with the words, Forest Witch. Only those who stayed until the end will understand. Oh, and if this video kept you hooked till now, I think it deserves a like, don't you? There's another video right here that connects with everything you just watched. Click it and stick with me, because around here the strange never sleeps.